Hi, I'm Steve Packard, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. Welcome to Cyber Risk Analysis, and today we're going to be looking at a very interesting question, a very broad question, very basic question. That is, what is the role of the CISO? It's a question that's been asked a lot recently, and I've seen it in a lot of publications and a lot of editorials and opinions on just what the role of the CISO is. Who's asking? Well, who's asking specifically is boards of directors and other corporate leadership who are now being tasked with hiring CISOs. Because for a lot of companies, although the CISO position isn't entirely new, it's new to them. And in many cases, it's a position that wasn't paid that much attention to. And that's because in years past, cyber risks just weren't that big a thing. They certainly weren't existential. And most CISOs spent their time stamping out very small fires. But today, things are a lot different. And a lot of companies that have never hired a results-driven CISO before are now seeing that they have to. So let's dive in and figure out exactly what the role of the CISO is. So just what is the role of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer? And by extension, how do you know that you found a good one? Well, their role is information security. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious, but there's a little bit more to it than that. First of all, it's worth noting that information security is a mature profession, complete with degrees, certifications, trade organizations, the whole 9 yards. So it's not as if you're going out there looking for something in totally virgin territory. It is, in fact, a profession that does exist, and there are credentials. Also, it's important to be as unobtrusive as possible, and this is not a joke. They really do need to keep in mind that it is a risk management pursuit, and for a lot of people, that can be a struggle. It can be really hard if you've been working in more of a profit-driven sector of the business where it's more front and center and you're more front office. It's a different tempo, and risk management does have its own unique demands. It has its own ways of budgeting. Now, if you want to be more technical about it, what they're actually responsible for, what they actually own, is information security and resilience. So by resilience, we mean that systems shouldn't go down just because of mistakes or because they fail. And you should have constant access to your data and your systems even during a disaster. So that's business continuity and basically just making sure that everything works, whether or not somebody breaks it or a force of nature or bad luck breaks it. There's also regulatory compliance and privacy policy. These are shared with other members of your organization, such as the corporate counsel. And if it's privacy policy, you may or may not have a CPO. But it is important that they're familiar with these concepts because they do cross over into the CISO's territory quite often. Now, the job of the CISO is very results-driven. It's very pragmatic, and that wasn't always the case, but it certainly is now. That's why they must have a formal cybersecurity background. There are other areas of experience that you might be able to work with if they're not perfect, but if they're not good with cybersecurity on day one, you could have a disaster. But you have to also understand that when you're getting your first in cyber talent, that's going to be a challenge. And if they're not competent, it's likely that nobody in your cybersecurity department will be competent. Believe it or not, I've seen that. I've seen large companies that spend a lot of money on cybersecurity, and yet nobody knows what they're doing. However, they should be somebody who is not only competent, but very confident in their abilities. Certification and formal credentials are very important. After all, it is a security field. They must have the correct security mindset. They should be able to handle things more or less on their own. Remember, they're a risk manager and they're there to protect you from a risk and not get in the way. However, when they do work with the C-suite, it will normally be with the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, the CPO, Chief Privacy Officer, CCO, Chief Compliance Officer, CSO, Chief Security Officer, and CRO, Chief Risk Officer. Your C-suite may not have that many C-suite officers, and most don't, but those are the ones that they would be working with in approximately that order. Now, it's worth noting, just to make sure that we get this right, that there are certain things that the CISO is not responsible for. Major corporate strategies like who do you want to merge with? Do you want to enter a new market? That's really not their territory. Nor are the financial decisions, such as if you make a lot of profit, do you want to issue dividends? Do you want to do a stock buyback? Do you want to pay down corporate debt? That's the CEO and the CFO right there. PR and marketing, also not their department. And they really shouldn't be the public-facing image of your company, except they might be if you're having a very bad day, but we're going to try to avoid that. They're also not responsible for the general operations of your company or even the IT operations beyond the security portion. Very importantly, they're not responsible for profitability. And this is something that you have to keep in mind with risk management because a lot of corporate leadership is used to the idea of having returns from their investments. But with cybersecurity in any form of risk management, you're not really looking for returns, you're looking to avoid losses. So again, it is a completely different strategy, psychology. It's just a different world. Now, I wasn't sure about including this, but I've seen this from a number of CISOs. Really fluffy, feel-good kind of political programs That's not really what they're there for. It's fine if they support that too. But I would be very careful with anyone who comes with a personal brand that sounds something like empowers young women to reach the stars in cybersecurity, enables self care in cybersecurity teams, breaks down the old boys club doors, or makes the workplace more responsive to diverse needs. Now, don't get me wrong, I am all for diversity, and I made a whole video about why we need more women in cybersecurity and why diversity matters and why it doesn't hurt us. But if this is really what they bring in as their frontline personal brand, and this is what they want to talk about, I would steer clear because I've seen plenty of that. And all of this really does exist for one reason: safety and security. So the reason we want to bring more diverse talent to cybersecurity is we need more talent. We need to tap more sources of talent, and we need more perspectives in cybersecurity. But it is always to serve security. Now, cybersecurity is security, and I want to be clear on that. That is something that you should always keep in mind, that this is a security field, and that's deadly serious. I mean, we could deal with all kinds of ugly situations and contingencies. So you need somebody who's going to make you secure before they pour glitter all over it. What skills must they have? Well, cybersecurity and other things like communications, management, team building. Yeah, those are important, but they are really distant seconds because, again, they are really all in service of cybersecurity and reducing cyber risks. So a deficiency in another area, not good or anything, but you could probably work with it. But a deficiency in cybersecurity knowledge, not good at all. That could cause you a big, big problem. Cybersecurity is security. I've said that before. Well, what do I mean by that? It does require ownership. It is a safety field, and you have to be willing to say, yes, I stand by these security controls. Has to be open to criticism. After all, if you're unwilling to consider that you might be wrong, somebody could get hurt. A lot of money could get lost. You have to be good under pressure, particularly crisis situations. And it's generally non-competitive. Security is more supportive, and there's more sort of intercompany cooperation, even amongst competitors, because you don't generally compete on safety. And one sector is generally going to have different cybersecurity needs than the others. There's risk management, of course. It is a risk management field, like any form of. There's risk management. It is, of course, a risk management field, as is all security. And there are legal obligations. There may be investigations, e-discovery. You may get sued, and they'll be the one doing the deposition. There's strong existing communities in cybersecurity, and that's really important, that they should be tapped into the cybersecurity organizations, community, meetups, that kind of thing, because that's how you learn what's going on, and that's how you stay current on the cybersecurity trends, because it's a very dynamic and changing field, that's for sure. It does require a lot of documentation, disclosure, and security professionals should always be approachable. You really don't want somebody to feel intimidated about coming to you with a security concern. Even if it turns out to be invalid, that's fine. They don't know, and that's what you're there for, to allay their fears and keep them secure. And in security, there's always a need for a lot of transparency, a lot of documentation. So don't hire anybody who's afraid of being audited or reviewed or having somebody else criticize them. These are very important points, and you're not going to find them in somebody who isn't totally competent and confident in their abilities. Well, what about formal qualifications? I did mention that they do exist. Well, for education, you ideally want a BS or MS in cybersecurity. That's right, cybersecurity, not in computer science, not in management, although management could be helpful. It's really interesting to note that the NSA did a study to try to determine what the most important credentials were that make a good CISO. And by good CISO, I mean a CISO who gets the job done without getting hacked. What they found was that the number one credential that made a difference was the BS in cybersecurity. That doesn't surprise me as somebody who has one. It does make a big difference because it's the only way you ever really learn everything in a comprehensive manner. The MS is good too, but that ranked a little bit below the BS, which is a little surprising since it is a higher degree. Doesn't surprise me though. The MS in cybersecurity tends to be more of an executive MS. It's less comprehensive, and it's more for people who are trying to expand their careers. Now, they have to be comfortable with officers and board members, although most people who've worked in cybersecurity and corporate level are, because that's something that generally we do pretty often. And they have to be familiar with corporate technology deployment and integration, which is different than other technology. Most large corporate and institutional settings have a test environment and a production environment. Most corporations have a certain rollback policy. They have change management. These are all things that you wouldn't be familiar with if you hadn't managed some projects in corporate technology development. There are also certifications, and the one that you really want to look for is the CISP, the Certified Information Systems Security Professional. Now, the complaint is that it can be hard to find, and to be fair, yeah, there aren't that many of us out there. There are only about 3,000 or so, they say, in the greater New York City area. That's not very many. And in total, only about 200,000 have ever been granted globally. Now, in the US, it's well under 100,000 are available in the private sector. So I get it, it's hard to find, but it's very important. You are, after all, looking for an actual cybersecurity professional, and they do have a lot at stake. So don't skimp on this one. If there's any requirement that you should make absolutely mandatory, it is the CISP. Although, to be fair, it doesn't in and of itself prove anything other than you could take a test. It does prove that you at least have some amount of buy-in to the profession and that you can, in fact, take a test, and there's quite a bit of good important material on that test. Others you can look for are the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, Certified in Risk in Information Systems Control, CRISC. There's also the Certified Cloud Security Professional, and there are others. Probably the one that stands out is the ISACA certification, Certified in Governance of Enterprise Information Technology. What that is it's more targeted for C-suite and higher level management of enterprise technology in a business. There's also the CISO from the EC Council. I'm not so sure about that one. That's a bit newer, a bit more in vogue, but it's not one that I would ever take over the CISP. Experience? Well, they're going to need a few years of actual cybersecurity experience. If they've worked at a SOC center, incident response, auditing, evaluation, or pen testing, that's a good, solid place to find that experience because those are all folks who know what the problems are, know where things go wrong, and know the mitigations that do help. There's one thing, though, that absolutely should not be a requirement, and that is corporate leadership experience. Call me crazy, but this is one that I would really avoid, and a lot of companies don't. One thing that you'll see is that companies will say they will compromise on anything, but you must have C-suite experience. Now, understand that the role of the CISO is to elevate cybersecurity expertise to the C-suite. It's not the other way around. Their job is cybersecurity. It's not generic leadership. And the problem with this is that this will limit your playing field so much. You're going to have so few people available. And really, you're going to have almost nobody with any cybersecurity experience at all. If you're looking for a previously employed CISO with a CISP and corporate leadership experience, which some companies say they just won't compromise on anything but the CISP, the one I don't think you should, well, you're going to have a hard time. There really are not that very many out there, and you're going to be ending up making some huge compromises. I promise you, this is not a good requirement to have. But what does a good CISO actually do? Well, they're a liaison between the C-suite and the security team. They're working with the C-suite to make sure that they know everything that's going on and they have full ownership of their security and data risk. And they're making sure that there are no impasses and that everybody is happy and very secure. They have a hands-on approach because that's important for ownership. And they do need to make sure that the quality control is good at all levels. They should evangelize security and get to know everyone. Getting to know everyone is very important, and security teams do tend to know each other pretty well. They should work closely with the CIO and the CRO. Those are the two that are most important, although they'll also be working with the CPO quite a bit, and the CSO, if you have those. They should stay out of the way of business processes. I don't mean to be repetitive, but it is important to keep that in the forefront of your mind. And they should take ownership of the security. They shouldn't be at all opposed to being the person where the buck stops for security. That's their job. And they should stay up to date on all matters of security. But they should do one thing above all else. This is really what separates the good CISOs from the great CISOs, and that is take on the single worst problem that cybersecurity has. Management disconnect. Yes, management disconnect, and that's a photo right there that shows how you do it. This is about knowing everybody. In order to deal with the problem of management disconnect, you have to have situational awareness, and that means that sometimes the generals have to talk to the privates, right? We all know that this is important. We all know that there can be impasses in the chain of command, in the military or in any institution. So getting this hands-on and knowing people, it is super important, and it is one thing that So getting this hands-on with knowing everybody and owning everything from the ground up, it's something that not enough CISOs and not enough corporate leaders do, and there'd be a lot fewer problems if they did. But what about the budget? I'm sure that's something that everybody's concerned about. And I wish I had a quick, simple, soundbite answer for that, but that really all does depend. It depends on where the starting point of the organization is. Depends on the nature of the organization. Is it a financial institution, consumer product organization? Is it a publicly traded company? Is it a nonprofit? However, it should be highly integrated. So it may not be budgeted as cybersecurity per se. It may be that when IT systems need to be upgraded, they need to be held to higher security standards, so it doesn't necessarily show up there. However, it should be highly justifiable. Remember, this is risk management, and if you put in a control, it should be there to deal with a risk, and it should reduce it. They should maximize the gains by improving on the efficiency and ease of use of the system. So when you install a new cybersecurity system or a new security center technology, that technology should not only not get in the way, it should be easier, quicker, faster for everyone to use. For example, access control. Well, in addition to security with access control, losing passwords is a very common problem and it results in a lot of help desk calls, a lot of lost time. So, that type of ease of security, doing that correctly, it is very important. It should be quantifiable. Now, I understand it might not always, and quantifiable analysis and risk management is always something of an estimate. But bear in mind that overpaying and underdelivering is very common. I've seen that many times, and security cannot be measured in dollars. That doesn't mean that the budget should be unlimited or anything. It should, in fact, be small, reasonable, and justifiable. Many organizations have indeed spent far too much on their cybersecurity, and they still have glaring holes. I've seen it many times. This is the result of strategic leadership not knowing how to deploy that. And what can often happen is that they try to compensate for perceived weaknesses in security by just piling on more and more vendor services, more and more consulting, more and more products, more and more technology. But that really doesn't get you anywhere if you don't know what it's there for. And if you hear something like our security is great and we take it very seriously, we spent $250 million on it last year, well, that doesn't actually tell you that it's good. What you do want, though, is experience, training, and certifications. Again, cybersecurity, it is a profession, and you really do need professionals who know this stuff. They're the only ones who are going to be able to deliver this to you on a good, reasonable budget and make sure that it is effective with the funds you do have. Now, this is really an area that is really quite difficult. Almost anyone can get their security up to good standards if they have an unlimited budget and unlimited staffing and unlimited time, but none of us do. And this is where cybersecurity professionals tend to fail. Only the absolute best are going to be able to deliver you a result that they can count on and you can count on and isn't expensive at all. And it shouldn't be. It should not be expensive. It should be very justifiable. But what is the role of the board of directors and corporate leadership in cybersecurity? Well, it should be minimal. There are exceptions to that in certain companies that produce a lot of security-related products, but in general, it should be minimal. They must, however, support the universal buy-in. Well, what does that mean? That means leading by example. If all employees need to do an annual cybersecurity refresher course, then the board of directors does too. And if company employees are not allowed to use their company devices to watch Netflix, then neither is the CEO. This is a very important principle. They also need to be at least supportive of security and understand its place, and stay up to date on any major changes in the security policy because it does affect them like it does anyone else. They should only have to commit their full time to cybersecurity rarely, though. I think that, like for a board of directors at most companies, a couple days a quarter would be more than enough. Of course, there are other times when there are regulatory compliance requirements. For example, Sarbanes-Oxley. That requires that all major risk controls for major financial risks, including cybersecurity, but not specifically to cybersecurity, do involve some amount of corporate sign-off. So there's no avoiding that. And really, they should exude confidence. Exude confidence to your employees, your customers, and your stockholders. Let them know that your cybersecurity is good and you're not worried about it. But don't say that if it's not. So what is the boardroom role of the CISO? Because you hear about this too. Well, importantly, they don't need to be there for all or even most meetings, and they don't need that much involvement, but they should be able to deliver at least monthly status reports. And they really should be available however often is needed. After all, they are a security official, so if you have concerns because there have been a number of cyber attacks or a 0-day, perhaps one of your closest peer competitors was recently attacked, their job is to allay your fears and make sure that you have the information necessary to make a decision. So they should be available. They should address all security concerns and really never dodge something and communicate security risks and status clearly. They should leave you feeling confident in your security, and they must be able to expressly justify their expenditures and be there if necessary in an emergency or a crisis. That is one thing about being in a risk management or cybersecurity field. If the company is shut down because there's a hurricane hitting the area, well, you're still going to be on duty. You're in security after all. And when things go bad, that's when you're going to be busiest. What about boardroom communications? Because this term has come up a lot, and it's something that a lot of questions are being asked about. Does the CISO have good boardroom communication skills? It's always bewildered me a little bit because most boardrooms are filled with English speakers, right? Well, what it really comes down to, I think, is not boardroom communications, but cybersecurity communications. So it's not the whom. It's not the to whom. It's the what. And cybersecurity is something that most people have a very hard time communicating in any simple way. However, the basics of cybersecurity are no more complicated than any other subject. Astrophysics, for example. Basically, gravity has things attracting each other. basically space can bend, right? At its most basic fundamental level, it shouldn't be complicated. It's also not actually a black box. That's how it's often described, but cybersecurity is a black box filled with shoddy enforcement and compliance issues. Cyber risks are financial risks, they're reputational risks, and they're operational risks, so they should be communicated as such, not as exotic risks, not as anything special, just regular old financial risks. And by extension, try to use as many conventional terms as possible. Don't call things some new term when it's just fraud, extortion, or espionage, when it's just a compliance violation, when it's just a compliance issue or a regulatory fine. Just call it what it is and don't bring in a lot of technobabble. That is really important, and that's something that a lot of cybersecurity professionals do struggle with. It is basically a compliance issue, and it should be described as that. And again, they should be confident, but no false confidence. There's really no reason they shouldn't be transparent on most things. One of the biggest myths is that cybersecurity requires a lot of confidentiality in and of itself. That's just not true. In most cases, if your security is solid enough, you could disclose the fact that you have that security in place. There are exceptions to this, of course, but it can be very difficult to find a true straight shooter who tells it to you like it is, but that's exactly what you're looking for. And don't ever let them get away with something like, well, it's complicated, you wouldn't understand. It's their job to communicate, it's their job to explain it. So that's not an okay thing to say, and really, everything should be very transparent, everything should be very well documented. I know that can be scary to some, but not to everyone. Well, what about the SEC? So this has come up a lot recently, and being a C-suite corporate officer, there's no escaping the fact that the SEC is going to be part of their life, at least if it's a publicly traded corporation. So if you're at a nonprofit or a partnership or a government agency, you can ignore this, but the SEC has issued a series of cybersecurity requirements, directives, and other statements. For one thing, they want cyber events that cause a material loss to be reported, and this does add to the pre-existing reporting requirements that the SEC maintains for other financial losses. Cyber controls have important SOX implications. That's Sarbanes-Oxley. And that includes things like document retention and data retention, documentation and compliance. These all touch on Sarbanes-Oxley, and they're all very important. The SEC also requires cyber risks to be reported annually. Now, this is probably something that should have always been there and should have always just been included in the generic risk reporting that is required in public auditing. But that is really something that is very important these days because it is a major financial risk and one that a lot of companies are not used to. Ideally, they should be familiar with public auditing, but not necessary if they're very good at cybersecurity. It is an area that you can work with, and it is really the public auditor's job to get that all squared away for you. Transparency, however, is what the SEC is looking for, so always keep that in mind. If you're being very transparent, the SEC should be very happy with you because the SEC's job is really to make sure that the investing public has accurate information and that companies are transparent about their risks, their potential, their investments, and their finances. Should the CISO be on the board of directors themselves? This question has been asked a few times recently, and it's actually kind of surprising to me. I wouldn't have asked it. I would say generally no. They're not going to be involved in your generalized corporate governance, and you don't really need boardroom material to be a CISO. Again, they are more tactical. They're more working in the security itself. So I would say generally no. But of course, there are exceptions to this. If you're making a lot of IoT products, if you deliver cybersecurity services, possibly if you're a financial firm that just does a lot of electronic transactions. In those cases, it's possible that they might. But in general, I would say no, and it's certainly not a prerequisite at all. What about AI experience? That's come up a lot recently. Well, ideally, yes. AI is something that's going to be changing everything, and the AI risks are very difficult to deal with because they're new and they're kind of strange in some cases. So ideally, they should have AI experience, but that's really asking a lot these days. There's a lot of people resume padding their way into saying that they have AI experience, but very few people have AI experience at all. And even fewer have experience with generative AI, which is a very new thing. The type of AI that we use now with ChatGPT and Google Bard and those sort of things. Well, what about AI experience? That's another interesting question that's come up recently. I would say that ideally, yes, AI is changing everything. AI is growing at a pace like we've never seen before, and AI introduced some new and novel risks to cybersecurity and otherwise. AI risks are basically technology risks, and basically they are IT risks, and therefore the concern of cybersecurity. But it's really asking a lot these days. There are not that many people who have any experience at all with the deployment of generative AI systems. They've only been around for a short time, about a year and a half or so for things like ChatGPT, GPT-4, and Google Bard, and they're constantly evolving, so that's really asking a lot. Okay, so if it's results driven, what are the results that we're looking to achieve? The big result is not being hacked, of course. That might seem obvious, but more than half of CISOs are not qualified for their jobs, and that's why we see so many of these large hacks. And what I mean by that is not that you will never have any hack at any level in your company. It just won't ever be an existential threat to your company. It shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. And if they're competent, it won't be. There will still be minor incidents. There will be hostile terminations. There will be threats. There will be false alarms. And those should all be handled on a low key and very well and very efficiently. They should maintain regulatory compliance. The organization should be well prepared for disruptive events. You shouldn't be worried about your business continuity. That should go along just fine. The boardroom and leadership, well, they should feel very at ease about their security. If their security is good and their CISO is good, they should have that communicated to them with confidence, and they should know what they need to know to take ownership of that to the degree that they need to. The company in general should feel good about its security. You don't want a CISO who leaves other people in your company feeling scared or not certain if they're secure or not. And in addition to that, although I didn't put here, you want your customers, your clients, and your investors to feel very at ease about your security, because at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Your security should not be overly obtrusive. It should operate smoothly. And of course, done within a reasonable budget, which maximizes the returns by leveraging IT upgrades and projects that already exist. You're constantly upgrading your IT equipment anyway, so make sure that it is secure when you do. And maintain maximum transparency whenever possible. Again, transparency, ownership, it is very important. When in doubt, keep one thing in mind though, cybersecurity is security. And if you keep this forefront in your mind, it will help a great deal, because there are certain things that you look for in security. Think, for example, about the chief of building security. Well, ideally, if they're doing a good job, you should see them all the time. They should be very friendly and available to everyone, and you check in with them, and they let you know if there are any changes in security policy. But they're not overbearing. They're not there all the time. And when you have to spend your whole day with the building security manager, well, that's probably a bad day. Cybersecurity and information security are very much the same. They shouldn't be front and center, and on a good day, they're not. They do require some amount of corporate leadership ownership, and if for no other reason, then that's required by the SEC and regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley. So while you do need to interact with them, they just shouldn't get in the way, it shouldn't be expensive, and it should get the job done. If you're not secure, if you're concerned about your security, or if you ever get a major hack that propagates through multiple departments of your company, then I'm afraid they haven't done their job very well. And unfortunately, many don't. So I hope you liked this episode of Cyber Risk Analysis. I'm Steve Packard, Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and have a great day.